Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. And in this episode, I want to do something a little bit different. And that is to make a very long compilation of these English topics for sleep. The idea is that you can play this video when you go to sleep at night or when you're on a long journey and listen to lots of English content to help immerse your brain with lots of English. This video will include lots of my recent videos together in one video. So you can just press play while you drive, while you're sleeping, or when you're on a long journey. So enjoy. Today we are going to learn or look at 10 tips to speak English more naturally, or 10 ways to speak more naturally in English. Okay, let's get started on today's topic. Today we are going to talk about something that can make a huge difference in your English speaking skills, and that is how to sound more natural when speaking English. I often talk about how accent is not so important, and that's true. And that's why I want to focus more on sounding natural. And I'm going to share 10 tips that will help you sound like a more confident and fluent speaker. These aren't just for experts or people with advanced English. They can be used by probably absolutely anyone, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced with your English language. So without further ado, without waiting anymore, let's get started on these tips. Each one is quite quick and quite simple, but sometimes I feel like the simplest advice is the most useful. Let's get started. Okay, tip number 1. Focus on grammar. I know, I often say that grammar is not so important when learning English. Of course, a level of grammar is important, but in my opinion, and I always say it, it's not the most important part of English language learning. But with sounding natural in English, grammar is very important. So just for understanding and being understood, it isn't the most important thing. But for sounding more natural, it is essential. It's very important. When you use the correct grammar and you speak with correct grammar, you sound more maybe professional or natural, more fluent. Your English sounds less strange. And I know that for many people, grammar is not the most exciting part of language learning, which is why I have put this on point number 1. But you can improve it through other ways. So not just grammar exercises. You can improve grammar through all of the parts of English language learning that you maybe enjoy more. So like reading, listening, and even like speaking practice and listening to what the other person is saying and the grammar that they use. And when you notice mistakes with grammar, try to understand what went wrong and how you can correct it or fix it for the next time. Very simple, but I understand difficult to do. Okay, so the next point, number 2, is to work on your pronunciation. So how you say things, not just the grammar and the content and the words, but how you actually say it. English has some very difficult sounds, And in one of my recent episodes, I did talk a little bit more about this. So about pronunciation and sounding more like a native speaker. But my main advice on pronunciation is to record yourself speaking and listen back and see the areas that you want to improve. And of course, different parts of the UK, for example, have different accents with different pronunciation. And that leads me to the point number 3, and that is don't stress about accents. Don't worry about accents. Yes, maybe you want an accent to sound like a native speaker, but you don't need to have a native accent to sound natural. I've talked about this a million times before on the podcast, so I'm not going to focus on it too much. But instead of worrying about accents, you're better to focus on clarity, so being clear, and general fluency, instead of trying to copy or sound like a certain or specific accent. People will understand you as long as you speak clearly, even if your accent isn't perfect. Okay, so enough about accents. On to point 4. Point 4, practice or maybe learn rhythm and stress. English is what we call a stress-timed language, and that means that we stress certain words in a sentence. For example, with the phrase, I'm going to the store, the word going is stressed. There's more focus on this word. So learning a bit more about this stress timing in the language and practicing it will help you to sound more natural, especially in conversation. Okay, point 5. Now is building fluency. So removing pauses and trying to sound more smooth. A lot of people think of fluency as being an advanced English speaker. So using lots of complicated words and grammar structures. But in reality, fluency is all about speaking smoothly without too many pauses. And a good way to practice this is just by having a think in English and maybe talking to yourself or recording your thoughts for a few minutes every day. The more that you speak naturally, without pauses, without stress, the more comfortable you'll get. So don't worry, you don't need advanced vocabulary or advanced grammar to be fluent. As long as you can speak without too many pauses and too much stress, then you are fluent and you speak fluently. Okay, of course I have to mention point 6, expand your vocabulary. Yes, you don't need tons and tons of words, loads and loads of words to sound natural, but it is useful to learn a variety of words. For example, instead of always using very before an adjective, you can learn more advanced or maybe more native adjectives. So instead of very good, you could say fantastic or excellent. And these tiny little changes with vocabulary can make you sound a little bit more natural. Okay, point 7. Be cautious, so be careful with idioms. I think I talked about this in another episode. Idioms are quite common in English, but also quite difficult to use. And I think that they aren't used as much nowadays as they used to be used. And you don't want to sound unnatural by using them too much. So I would learn them in context, but in general, I would kind of avoid using idioms if you're an English language learner. to me, it doesn't sound the most natural when people overuse these. And English speakers in general, especially younger generations, don't really use idioms very much. But with point 8, what you should do is learn phrasal verbs. Phrasal verbs are, 2 or more words that maybe you put together that mean something different. Like give up, for example, means to stop doing something or to stop trying. These are so important in English. I think people don't focus on them as much as they should. These are way more important than idioms or phrases. These are really, really important to sound natural in English. Okay, number 9 is to change your sentence starters. So think of and learn some new phrases to start your sentences. Instead of saying, I think, for example, you could say, in my opinion, or from my perspective. So just think of maybe some phrases or words that you overuse and have a look at how you could change those. Maybe make them a little bit more advanced or just different. So you're not saying just something else. You're not saying the same thing all the time. And finally, point 10 is maybe not what you would expect. It is don't stress about sounding natural. You can do all of these tips that I have talked about, and it will help you over time to improve and sound more natural. But when you're speaking, when you're using English, don't stress. Use the knowledge that you have. Don't put pressure on yourself, and with time and with these steps, you will start to sound more natural in English. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Remember to check out the Patreon link in the description of the podcast and the episode description if you would like to get bonus episodes with me and lots of benefits and support this podcast. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Easy English podcast. I'm your host, Oliver, and today I am going to be talking about my favourite city in the UK and why it's my favourite city. And that is Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. But first, before I tell you about Edinburgh and the city and why it's special to me, why I love it, I want to remind you that I have made a Patreon. The link is in the description below. It is a way to support me and this podcast, to allow me to work harder and more often on this podcast and the project in general. And through Patreon, which is available now in almost every country, for as little as $1.50, you can get access to lots of extra podcast episodes every month. So 1 extra episode per week, as well as easy news in English, and a bunch of other stuff. So check it out, and if you want to support me and help me with this podcast and project, you can go over there and do so and help me out. So thank you for everyone that has subscribed so far, and I look forward to seeing more of you guys over on Patreon. Okay, back to this episode. So there are, of course, many great cities in the UK. And I often find when a lot of people come to the UK, they visit London, and maybe they go to like Manchester or Liverpool, possibly, or they spend some time in the countryside or traveling to some other natural sites, which is great options. But I always recommend to go a little bit further north and definitely visit Edinburgh. Edinburgh, so the capital of Scotland. And the reason why I have said the name a few times is because I've noticed it's quite a difficult word for foreigners to say or non-native speakers. So we say it Edinburgh, Edinburgh. So it's a soft sound on the end. It's not like Edinburgh, which I've heard some Americans even say. So I've actually in the past made an episode about my favourite cities in the UK. So it's more of a short general episode listing some of the best cities that I've visited and why I like them. But I did promise to do this separate episode about Edinburgh. So for those of you that don't know, I actually lived in Edinburgh for 3 years. I studied there, and I go back and visit quite often, frequently, quite often. And in the Patreon, I actually have uploaded an extra bonus episode about my personal connection to the city. So why I was there and about my time there and some special moments that happened to me while I was there. But in this episode, I'm going to talk a bit more generally about why I like the city. So to start with, Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland. And I think that it's one of the most beautiful cities in the UK. It's full of so much history, and honestly, when you walk through the streets, it feels like you're stepping back in time. You can see all of the old architecture and buildings, and parts of the city look, to me, really medieval. Lots of stone and old streets, and a very good atmosphere. But I'll talk a bit about the atmosphere in a moment. So still on the architecture, there are so many different great pieces of architecture like Edinburgh Castle, some really cool monuments and historic buildings. And I know that most cities have these things, but what makes Edinburgh so great to me is the old town. So in general, Edinburgh is split in two parts. So you can divide it into two distinct or separate parts. One part is the old town, and the other part is the new town. And both of these parts are separated by a very long road called the Royal Mile. Now, the old town is full of very historic old buildings. They have something called cobblestone streets, as well as the castle, and really it's my favorite. It looks amazing. Lots of narrow, so not very wide, very narrow streets, or I guess we call them avenues, like side roads. And you can explore all of these little places and see all of these cool little spots in the city. Whereas the new town of Edinburgh has a lot more maybe modern buildings mixed with some old. Lots of big shops, malls, restaurants, brands. It's much more modern. Whereas in the old town, you would find a lot more like old family businesses, and old cafes and bars, like pubs, which have been around for hundreds of years. And the big street that runs through the middle of Edinburgh is called the Royal Mile. And this runs from the Parliament, so the political building of Scotland, right up to the castle. And along this street, there are so many interesting little shops, pubs, like very old pubs, old buildings, and street performers. So people who will do tricks or music. And along this street, there is a fantastic atmosphere. In general, I think what makes Edinburgh so special is the atmosphere of the city. So it's not just about that history, it's about the feeling that you have when you're there. A mix of really old and new together. A little bit similar to maybe that feeling that you can get in areas of London, but for me, it's even stronger. There are not many cities in the world that have such a strong mix of old and new. And the old is so well preserved. There are so many cities that I've been in or lived in which have had a lot of new. So there are some nice historic buildings, but in general, most of the experience around the cities are, large motorways or streets, lots of cars. It's very open and wide, a lot of wasted space with the traffic and the cars. And they can be quite aggressive for pedestrians. Pedestrians are people walking, so not using cars to walk around. And the UK has many of these cities too, as well as, for example, Moscow, and even Paris, other big cities, and of course many American cities that have so many cars, such big roads, and it can be quite aggressive. That's why one of the reasons why I like Edinburgh is it's a very walkable city. It is not a good city for drivers, so they really, really discourage driving. They don't want people to drive. They charge high amounts for parking. It's very awkward to drive, and it makes more sense to get a bus or to walk, because most areas you can walk to quite easily, in the centre especially. And that creates a really nice open atmosphere in the city. And although it's quite a small city, this use of space, this really good use of space, makes it feel like there is so much in such a small space. And as a result, it makes the city, to me, seem much bigger. Just to take an example, lots of the old buildings have multiple layers. So, for example, there could be a restaurant on the top floor, then something else on the street level floor, so the middle one, and then there's even a basement which has a bar. And the city is built in these different layers, especially in the old town, which is such a great use of space. It's fantastic. And this use of space brings me on to another great point about Edinburgh and its use of space, and that is nature. So the green spaces and the nature. So Edinburgh in the centre looks amazing. I mean, the castle, Edinburgh Castle, is actually on a hill, and in front of that hill there's a beautiful park. And not far from the old town, there is an extinct volcano. So when something is extinct, it is no longer active. It's not working anymore. So the volcano is old. It doesn't work. And you can climb it, and there's a lovely park around it with a lake and amazing views. And I mean, this is like a 20 minute walk from the city centre. To me, that's fantastic. There are lots of parks and green spaces around the city, and it's such a good mix with nature. There were times when I lived there that even walking home, I actually saw foxes and other animals in the streets because they had come from these green spaces. So honestly, the city does a great job of preserving and keeping this nature. So in Edinburgh, there are lots of landmarks. So this word, I will teach you, landmark, means a famous or important building or place. So for example, the castle is a landmark. The volcano, so Arthur's Seat is the name of the volcano. It's a landmark. So many landmarks and places to visit and go to. And of course, every summer in Edinburgh, the city is full of life with the Fringe Festival. This is a live comedy festival, and people from all over the world, comedians and tourists alike, all come to Edinburgh to perform and to listen to performance, and it is just so full of life. So many people, visitors, performances, events. It is fantastic, an absolutely wonderful time. A festival, for those that don't know, is a special event. So where people celebrate with some performances, food, or activities. Okay, so, maybe one final point. I think the people in Edinburgh are also very welcoming. It's got that friendly and open vibe. Welcoming is when people are friendly, and they make people feel comfortable there. Okay, so those were some of the reasons why I would argue, why I think that Edinburgh is probably, in my opinion, the best city in the UK, or at least it's my favourite city in the UK. Of course, you might not agree with me. There are negative points too about Edinburgh. Number one, the weather. It's not very good. And it's much worse than London, to be honest. It is a lot colder, but it is much further north, so we have to consider that. And you're so close from Edinburgh to lots of beautiful places in Scotland. You can travel to Lake Lomond, to lots of different mountains and nature spots, which, from London is a bit further. So the weather isn't all that bad. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. Just to recap some new words that I explained today. So of course we had landmark, so a famous or important building or place. Extinct, so when we talked about the volcano, the extinct volcano, extinct means no longer active, so it's no longer working. Welcoming, I think I said as well, so something that is friendly or makes people feel comfortable. And festival, so a special event where people celebrate with performances, food, or activities. So thank you so much for listening. Of course, if you want to support this podcast and me, check out the Patreon in the link below and have a look, and honestly, just even a little bit helps, and you will get access to lots of bonus content every month. And of course, you will support me too and help me to make this podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Understandable English podcast. My name is Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about a very important or commonly asked about topic, and that is how to speak English more like a native speaker. Time and time again, so very, very often, I see English language learners wanting to speak English more like a native speaker. Perhaps they want to have an English accent, or maybe they want to learn slang or use the words that native English speakers use, but it's really common in general. So today I want to give you a sort of step-by-step guide as to how I would advise you to try to sound more like a native speaker. But first I want to say that I don't think it's important. I don't think having an English accent is important, or using slang. Personally, I think that everyone should be proud of their accent, and the most important thing is just to be understood, so to be clear and understandable. But anyway, today we will talk about how to sound more like a native speaker. First, I just want to very quickly remind you that I do have sort of bonus content now, an extra episode of the podcast each week for premium subscribers. If you're interested in that and it's available in your country, it costs just 99p per month, so that's a little over $1, and it helps to support this podcast, and you get lots of extra episodes every month. Okay, and also check out my free YouTube channel. The link is in the description for easy English vlogs. So let's get into the main podcast. Okay, so the first step that I would usually advise learners to look at is sounds. So these are the important sounds of the language and the pronunciation. So the first step in speaking like a native speaker is definitely pronunciation. Native speakers, I would say, often have specific or very set ways of pronouncing certain sounds. And actually, how you pronounce these sounds in English can depend on the area you're from. For example, even in different parts of the UK, you will pronounce these sounds differently. Like, let's give an example with the ER sound. So any word that ends in an ER, if you're from, for example, the north of the UK or Northern Ireland, you will pronounce these sounds like a hard sound, like And if you're from the south of England or many areas of England, you will pronounce it with a soft sound, like an ah. So for example, I would say, being from Northern Ireland, I would say power. And someone from the south of England would say power, like a soft ah sound. So that is something to keep in mind. What type of accent do you want? Do you want to sound like you're from Scotland, or from Northern Ireland, or from London? And even in London, there are lots of different accents. But maybe you just want to sound like the Queen or the King now, and that's okay too. but it's something to keep in mind. Okay, so once you know what accent you want, you need to focus on these sounds and practice how to say them. There's lots of videos online, and really focus and practice these key sounds. The next step is you're going to want to listen to lots of native speakers. This is so important. Even listening to movies or music or YouTube videos, these are the best ways. Actually, to be honest, I don't think music is a great way to learn speech, but the best way, in my view, is listening to real content. Even TV shows and movies, in some ways, are not representative, so they don't reflect or show how the real English sounds. So in some ways, it is better to watch real YouTube videos or Instagram or content from real English people. This is a great way to learn and practice. But here is the key part that lots of people miss. They will listen to this stuff, they will watch it, and they think, if I listen to it and watch it, that's fine. I will suddenly start to speak more like this in the future. But you need to copy it and repeat the sounds and the words to start to speak like these people, like the native speakers. That's what you need to actually make sure you do, to make it a practice, not just improving your understanding. Yes, listening and watching English content helps to improve our understanding. It does help our vocabulary, but only by actually practicing our speaking will we improve the pronunciation and the sound of how we speak. We need to actually actively work on it. Okay, the next key point I would say to focus on is something I call, or I think it's actually called, connected speech or connecting speech. And these are words that flow and join together. And maybe they change a little bit. And often native speakers will say them in a very specific way. And actually, from consuming or watching or listening to native English content, you will hear these phrases. And then you can think, I need to use this, or I need to learn this. And I'll give you some examples of these. For example, linking words. This could be saying I'm gonna instead of I am going to. It gets shortened to I'm gonna. Or for example, what are you doing? Could be what you doing. So a short version of that. Of course, not everyone uses these short versions, and some are more specific to different countries. Like I would say, what you doing, what are you doing, is more American. But even here in the UK, we would often say, I'm gonna, instead of I am going to. And these would be called reductions, making the words smaller, so joining together more. Oh, another one I would use as well, maybe quite often, is wanna. So instead of I want to, I might say I wanna. And perhaps by using these, you can also start to sound a little bit more native. But try to use them naturally. Don't use them all the time. and don't overuse them. So using them too much to the point where it's unnatural. Native speakers would also tend to use these types of phrases or words in more casual social situations. So not so much at work or in maybe school or academia. We would use them more with friends or casual interactions. And that would be the main use. Okay, so the third point I want to talk about is very difficult, and it's actually quite difficult to explain. And I think this is an area that a lot of learners struggle with, or at least never think about. And that is intonation and rhythm. What does that mean? So native English speakers have a certain melody or a rhythm when they speak. And that is not what they're saying, but how they say it. How they say it, if we want to say it more English. So the tone, so how we say it, can go up or down depending on what we're saying. Let's take, for example, when we ask questions, the tone tends to go up at the end if it's a yes or no question. Like, for example, are you coming? You can hear my voice rises at the end. This is a basic example, and then the reply to that question might be, I am coming. So the tone drops or falls at the end. So when you're listening to English content, it's really important to listen to how the rhythm or the melody of the speech is. And that is, in my eyes, more important than accent. It's more important than the words. It is how to really, truly sound like a native speaker. And it can be very hard to learn, maybe even impossible to study it, but you can practice and improve by copying or imitating rhythm or tone. But over time, you will naturally find your own rhythm and intonation, which will develop and begin to sound more natural. Okay, another part of this, which is equally as important, is emphasizing important words. Now, native speakers definitely don't stress every word equally. You can hear, I just did it. I said, native speakers don't stress every word equally, or definitely don't stress every word equally. I stressed the word definitely to put extra emphasis on it. Now, we do this in our own native languages, but often when we speak in a foreign language, we don't really emphasize or stress words as much as we should. Now, don't do this with everything, but do pay attention to it when you're listening to native speakers speak, and experiment and practice emphasizing more words. You might find it very helpful. For example, a very commonly stressed word is really. So for example, I really want to go. And that emphasizes that you want to go. It's a stressing or an emphasizing word to show that you really want to go. And try practicing this with some of your sentences. Now, with each of these things, the tone and the stressing or emphasizing of words, listen for them, watch for them when you're listening to a podcast, even my podcast, or a TV show or a YouTube video. listen for them. Try to identify these points, to find them, and then copy them. That is the key, the secret, if you will. Okay, so the fourth point. This is going to be a longer podcast today because I think there are very important tips in this step-by-step guide. So the fourth point is to expand your vocabulary, but mainly by using idiomatic expressions. So idiomatic expressions or colloquial phrases, we could call them. And most importantly from these are phrasal verbs. If we look at first idioms, I'll be honest, I don't use a lot of idioms in my speech. And the biggest mistake I see learners use with idioms is overusing them. So maybe they've heard in class an idiom like "it's raining cats or dogs" or something like this, and they try to use it all the time. They will quickly realize that not many people say it, particularly younger people or the younger generation. Idioms were much more popular in the past, and I've noticed, particularly amongst my generation, that they aren't used so much. But phrasal verbs are so important. I know they're difficult and there are so many to learn, but do start to add these and use them in your conversations and practice them as much as you can. It is a really key point or a core point to sound more natural. I am working on an ebook for phrasal verbs at the moment with short stories to teach phrasal verbs. I'm not sure when it will be ready, but I will let you guys know when that's available. Okay, the next point when we're talking about all of these verbs and phrases are colloquial phrases. So for example, instead of saying, "How are you?" you might say, "What's up?" or "How's it going?" And this can be different in each part or place of the UK too. Don't overuse these or say them too much, but using a few of them here and there in your speech can look very natural and make you sound much more like a fluent speaker or a native speaker. It's a great way to make your speech more interesting. But again, try to use them more in casual settings, like with friends or outside of the workplace. Don't use them so much in work because it can look quite unprofessional. Okay, so I have a few final points on how to practice. So now that I've given you all of the areas that you should focus on, now how to practice. I've already mentioned listening to lots of stuff and repeating, but here are a few extra points. This one is basic or easy to understand, and that is talking with native speakers and listening to them. Try to meet them, maybe at a language exchange club or an English speaking club, or maybe through a service like Tandem or Hello Talk, or perhaps even just a teacher that you have lessons with. It's one of the best ways. Next is actually to record yourself speaking. So to make some sentences, speak it into your phone's microphone and play it back and listen. This will help you to hear different areas that you can improve or make better. And finally, try to stay consistent. If you're trying to sound more like a native speaker, you need to be practicing it almost every day. I'm not saying you have to every day, but it's better to do, for example, 10 minutes practice per day than 2 hours once per week, in my opinion. It's good to practice a little bit every day if you can, and that will help you to have continuous improvement over time. So thank you so much for listening today. Remember, if you're interested in supporting the podcast and it's available in your country, I know it's not available everywhere, do subscribe to the premium Spotify podcast. The link is in the description below, and you will get access for just a little over $1 per month. You'll get access to extra bonus podcasts, and you can ask me any question and I will answer them in the podcast for you. And also make sure to check out below and subscribe to the Understandable English YouTube channel, where I post for free for everyone easy English vlogs. So real life content from my life in English, which is easy for you to understand and practice. So thank you again for listening, and I hope you have an amazing day, and I wish you the best of luck with improving your English pronunciation and speaking. Goodbye. Hey everyone, I'm Oliver, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. And today we are discussing a very exciting and useful topic: how to think in English. When you start thinking in English, speaking and understanding become so much easier and more natural. So today we are going to look at how we get started with thinking in English. Let's go. Okay, so for me, when learning another foreign language, one of the most important steps is starting to think in that language. Whenever we don't think in that language, it can be quite complicated to actually, create sentences, to get the right words. Often we are trying to translate in our brain rather than just speaking. When we think in our native language and translate, we do often get stuck, or we lose the flow, so how the conversation is going. Thinking in English removes that extra step of translation. So it allows you to speak faster and with a lot more confidence. And it will help you to understand conversations more naturally without having to translate every word. But okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds a lot easier than it actually is. But there are some simple steps that you can start doing to try to improve your ability to think in English. One of the biggest mistakes that people make, including myself when studying another language, was that, naturally I would start to think in that language. But that is not always true. Once we develop the habit of translating into English in our head, it is quite hard to stop translating in our mind, in our brain. And for some people, it seems to be an impossible task to start thinking in English. So these tips are very basic, they are simple, but they can help you to actively try to think in English. Let's take a look. The first tip is something I like to teach students, particularly those who are at more beginner and lower intermediate level. And this is to name objects around you in English. So wherever you are, it doesn't matter where you are, You can do this at any time during the day. Start naming in your brain things that you see in English. For example, if you're in your room or at your office, you might say lamp, desk, or window in your mind. And this helps to get your brain used to associating, so connecting English words to the things that are directly around you. It might sound simple and a little bit stupid, but it really does help. And it's one of those exercises, one of those practices that you can do absolutely anywhere. Isn't that fantastic? The second task that I would ask you to do, another tip, which is great to start practicing, that is to describe your day in simple sentences. So at the end of the day, try to describe what you did in English. This can be simple sentences. For example, I ate breakfast, or I worked on a project. And this helps you to make simple sentences in your brain. Sentences that you don't need to translate. Things that you are comfortable with. Basic, easy sentences. Try to think with these simple sentences at the end of each day. And you should start to notice that you're not actually translating these phrases and sentences because they are quite easy and you know them well. Okay, now the third tip that I would like you to try to use, and that is use English when you are making decisions. So for example, during the day, if you have a thought about, what you should eat, try to actively think this decision out in English. For example, should I have a sandwich or a salad? And making these small decisions in English helps to create that habit of thinking in the language. And it's a little bit more advanced than naming objects in the room, for example, or even describing your day. It's something that you can start to actively do every time that you choose something. And it will get your brain into that training, into that habit of trying to think in English. And the final tip that I will share with you in these steps is probably the most simplest or broad, and that is to simply take 2 or 3 minutes every day, it doesn't matter when, and start to think about what you're doing in that moment in English. It's a little bit like describing your day at the end, but in the present tense. So what you're doing in that moment. For example, I am making a coffee. I want a coffee right now. I am very thirsty. I need some caffeine, so I am making a coffee. That type of thing. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want, but just try to make these basic sentences about what you're doing in that moment. And try not to translate if you can. So this leads us to the next important point. What do you do when you're stuck? What I mean by that is when you don't know the word for something, or the phrase, or the verb. And sometimes you won't, and that's okay. Try to think around it. For example, describe what you mean in simpler words. For example, if you can't think of the word umbrella, you might say something that keeps the rain away. And this practice helps you to stay in English instead of switching your brain back to your native language. So it keeps you focused on English. And this is a tip that you can use even when you're speaking in English to try to get around those pauses and those language switches in your brain. So that's everything that I want to share with you guys today. Thank you so much for listening. If you're new, please subscribe to the channel for more great English content. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Understandable English podcast. I'm Oliver, and I am back from my holiday with another episode. So hopefully I can make some more consistent episodes going forward, as I have already had my wedding and holidays. So today's episode of the podcast is something a little bit different, or a different topic that I've never really talked about before, but I randomly thought about it and decided it's quite an interesting topic, and that is British pub culture, or British drinking culture. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why pubs are so popular here. If you've ever been to the UK, or maybe you have a stereotype or image about the UK and Britain as having lots of old pubs and lots of people like to go to the pubs and drink, then of course you're actually correct. This is a true stereotype. So we're going to look at the history of pubs and a little bit about how they are important in the UK. So a pub is like a bar or a tavern, so a bar where you can also maybe stay overnight, like a hotel, and get food as well. But really, I think of it as a bar which often acts as a community gathering place. So it's not just to have drinks and watch sports. You can also eat lunch, drink beer, play some games with friends sometimes, and even in many pubs, book a room if you're traveling and you need somewhere to stay. And of course, these exist in almost every country around the world, but in British culture, they have a very special spot in sort of the heritage or the culture of the country. And so many things from English literature to poetry play an important role, or pubs play an important role in the history of many aspects of British culture. Pubs here are very old. The tradition of pubs is very, very old, and they have been around for thousands of years, just in different names and appearances. Even as early as when the Romans were here in the UK, there were lots of pubs built along the roads that they built, so the roads that they built. And from what I found online, even by the year 1577, just England and Wales alone already had over 14,200 pubs, or ale houses as they called them, which at the time was one pub for every 187 people. That's pretty crazy when you think about it. So most people, or lots and lots, the majority of the population, went to pubs regularly. They loved visiting pubs. And today there are so many different types of pubs. They are all not the same. There are modern pubs. There are chains of pubs. So when a company opens lots of different pubs or buys pubs, and there are traditional pubs too. And there are also what people call gastropubs. So these are pubs that are more focused on food. So they have a higher food quality, and some can even be Michelin starred, so like very fancy food. In history, pubs and this kind of culture around drinking houses, we could say, is very related to entertainment. So there was lots of singing, gaming, or sports, and that is still even the case today. A lot of pubs actually have their own sports team, like sports teams for kind of traditional pub games like darts or pool or snooker, and various other games as well. It's very popular that people play quizzes or bingo or different kind of games in pubs, and they'll have various or lots of different nights with different activities. And because of that, pubs are used to gather local communities, and they're an important socializing tool, particularly in more rural areas. So areas in the countryside, not in the city. And it's a way of seeing sort of friends and family from the local area. Pubs are a popular and great place for people to talk about sports, family, politics, and really openly about everything. They're also popular here even at lunchtime. So particularly in the city, people can pop round to a pub on their lunchtime break, have a quick drink and a social meeting with friends. And this is usually quite socially acceptable here. So it's normal. You might be wondering, what are the most popular drinks at a pub? Usually at a pub, they're not the place for fancy cocktails. You go to a bar or a cocktail bar or somewhere a bit fancier to get those types of drinks. But it is a popular place to get lager, so some kinds of beer, maybe some wines, cider, or some mixed spirits, or like vodka and whiskey, that type of thing. But usually most pubs won't, unless it's a bit fancier, won't serve cocktails. But of course, you don't have to drink. You can also get soft drinks or like Coke or fruit juice or anything like that. And even just get food. Not everyone drinks at pubs. Some people just like to socialize there with friends. The drinking culture in the UK can be a little bit strange for foreigners sometimes. I think they are quite surprised sometimes at how much British people like to go to pubs and drink. Of course, not everyone drinks or goes to pubs, but I'm speaking generally about the population. And it can be associated with just this cultural link with pubs and bars throughout history. And it's become a very common trend. But I feel like this trend is changing, and statistics also say that. So with younger generations, they are drinking less and less. And as a result, pubs are having some difficulty, both because things are more expensive, but also because people are drinking less in younger generations. So it'll be interesting to see how this affects the future of pub culture. But currently, around 15 million people visit a pub at least once a week in Britain. That's still quite a lot, in my opinion. So lastly, I want to talk about an interesting feature of how people usually buy drinks here in the UK. So the most popular system with groups of friends is called rounds. And I noticed that it's quite different in many countries when I visited. In most countries, people just buy and pay for their own drinks. In the UK, usually we buy rounds of drinks. Let's say you go with 3 friends to a pub. First, one friend will buy 3 drinks for everyone. So they'll buy a drink for the 2 other friends. Then the next friend, once everyone has finished their drinks, will buy 3 drinks and share them with the other 2 people. And then the final person will also buy a round of drinks. And this can keep continuing. And it's a nice system, but it can, in my opinion, be quite bad, because usually what happens is the people who start first end up paying for more rounds, so more drinks, than the people who buy drinks later in the order. But this is how a lot of people do things here. It's very, very common, and usually seen as the norm, or the normal way of doing things when you're out with friends. So that's everything I want to talk about today around pub culture and drinking culture in the UK. I hope this was interesting. And if you haven't already, or you're not already watching this or listening on YouTube, please check out the channel, which is in the description below, and follow or subscribe for more, and share with your English learning friends. Thank you, and have an amazing day. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Understandable English podcast. I'm Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about words that make you sound smarter. Okay, this sounds a little bit strange, or a different kind of strange topic for the podcast today. But what I am going to be doing is reading or looking at an article from Preply, which is based on a study of words that make you sound smarter. This study, a study is some research. It is an experiment or a trial or an academic paper which is looking at results. It is testing something and analyzing or seeing the results from it. So that is how I would explain a study or a scientific study. And this study was carried out in America to see what words that people used to sound smart, and what words that people think make others sound more intelligent or smarter. I thought this might be interesting because perhaps you would want to use some of these words or understand them. So let's take a look. First, the article talks about how using some of these advanced words can show others that you are quite intelligent or smart, or it can also kind of give the impression that you are trying very hard to appear smart. So to make people think that you are smart even if you aren't. And it can be viewed negatively as well. From the study carried out, they found that almost 3 out of 5 people used complex, so complicated or difficult vocabulary to try to appear smarter. That's very interesting. And almost 60% of people have used a word to sound more intelligent or smarter, even if they didn't know what the word meant. That's crazy. But there was another question in this study, and they asked people if someone uses complex, so more difficult or complicated vocabulary or words, does it make them seem smarter to you? And almost 80% of people said yes, that they do think that someone is more intelligent or smarter if they use complex vocabulary. So let's take a look at the top 5 words from the survey of which people use to sound smarter from this research of speech. Okay, so we'll look at 5. I will read each one and then explain what it means. And we will start at number 5 and work our way up to number 1, which is the most popular. Okay, are you ready? Let's go. Number 5 is adulation. Adulation. It will be in the subtitles on this podcast, and if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the correct spelling. So adulation. And what this means, the exact definition, is excessive admiration or praise. So when someone is like really a big fan, they are admiring and loving what you do or who you are. For example, a rock star or an actor may dislike adulation from their fans because the fans care or love so much the rock star or the actor or the star. It's too much praise, too much attention and love from those fans. So that's what adulation is. It's like intense or too much admiration or praise. Okay, number 4. The 4th most commonly used complicated word to sound smart or intelligent is anomaly. Anomaly. And anomaly, from the official definition, is something that deviates, so is different from what is standard, normal, or expected. For example, he was an anomaly in the group because he was the only one that had blue eyes. Everyone else had brown eyes. He had blue eyes, so he was the anomaly. Okay, number 3 is the word brevity. Brevity. And simply put, to say something or write something with brevity is to not use too many words and to be very exact or precise with your use of words. So you're being very straight to the point and not over-explaining or overusing words. Okay, and number 2 is accolade. Accolade. An accolade is an award or maybe a prestige or a privilege which is given to someone to acknowledge or recognize something that they have done or achieved. So you can think of it really in general, in most cases, as an award or a prestige. So that is accolade. For example, he has won a number of accolades for his work. So a number of awards. And finally, the number 1 most used, more complicated vocabulary or word to sound more smart is articulate. Articulate. So this is actually a great word in my opinion. I think it's a very good description word, and it is an adjective to sort of show the ability that someone speaks fluently and clearly, like very well. So this speaker is articulate. They speak fluently and very well, very clear, easy to understand, perhaps a great communicator. Okay, so that was the top 5 words that people use to sound smarter. These were difficult, so let me know if you will try to use them, or maybe you just want to understand them. But always remember, communicating in English is not about using fancy words or complicated vocabulary. It's about understanding each other and speaking in a way that is natural and comfortable for ourselves. If we try to speak in an overcomplicated way, in situations or social positions where we don't have to, it will sound quite strange. You know, perhaps when we are doing academic English or business English, using more complicated words is fine. But if we are just talking with friends or having a casual conversation in a shop, it's a little bit strange to use words that people might not even understand. So do keep that in mind as you study English. Don't overcomplicate what you are trying to say. Say it clearly, directly, and in a way that is natural for you and to others. I hope this was interesting in some way. If you are new, make sure to check out my YouTube channel in the description below. I post real life vlogs in English on that channel. They are easy English vlogs where I speak just like here in a clear and easy way to understand. So please check that out. And if you love this podcast and want to support it, please consider subscribing to the podcast for just 99p or less than $1 almost per month for extra podcast episodes and content every week. Thank you very much for listening and have a wonderful day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast. I'm Oliver, and today we are going to be learning about the benefits of coffee in a fun and easy way in English. I decided to choose this topic because I love coffee. Do you like coffee? Let me know in the comments below. So many people love to drink tea and also coffee, but coffee is my favorite, which is why I decided to make this episode. Recently, I was reading some articles about coffee and the many benefits that you can get from it. People say there are some health benefits from drinking coffee. Of course, many of us drink coffee to feel like we have more energy. But are there other reasons to drink coffee? Let's find out today. If you're like me, you probably have to start your day off with a cup of coffee. When I wake up in the morning, the first thing I want, even before I have the rest of my breakfast, is usually a lovely cup of hot coffee. My favorite coffee, or my favorite type of coffee, is a cappuccino. I love cappuccinos with nice warm milk. For me, it isn't just about maybe feeling less sleepy in the morning, but I also just really love the taste of coffee. I love the flavor. It's so nice. But when I was reading an article, I read that there may be some additional health benefits from coffee, which is great. So let's take a look at some of these potential health benefits. So one of these potential health benefits is that it can be connected or linked to a lower risk of type 2 diabetes. Wow, that would be crazy if it's true. And in fact, one study showed that per cup of coffee that someone has, it was linked to a 6% lower risk of getting type 2 diabetes. Another potential benefit from coffee is for your brain, so your brain health. It seems to me that the studies or the research that has been done in this area is a little bit mixed, maybe uncertain. But some studies and reviews have shown that it can lead to a reduced risk of Alzheimer's. So when you maybe have that disease where you start to forget things and lose your mind, and also a lower risk of then Parkinson's disease. So if that's true, if it is, if there's further study done and they find this, that is a really big health benefit for the brain. And another potential benefit is that coffee can be linked or connected to a lower risk of depression. So according to one study or a few studies, coffee was linked to an 8% lower risk of depression. Wow. So we've heard some of these potential benefits, but is there anything bad from drinking too much coffee? So without even reading online, I can tell you a couple of negatives for me, or what I think. So I think that one of the negatives is that you can get really used to drinking coffee. Coffee has caffeine in it, and caffeine actually can be quite addictive. So for me, for example, I drink a coffee in the morning as soon as I wake up. I go downstairs and I make a cup of coffee, and it helps me to wake up and feel alive in the morning. But if I stopped drinking that coffee, I would probably, and there have been some mornings where I don't have coffee, and I wake up and I feel terrible. So I feel like I need the coffee. And in that way, caffeine and coffee can kind of be an addiction. It's almost like a socially acceptable addiction in the 21st century. What do you think about that? Another potential negative impact of coffee could be on our sleep. So if you drink coffee too close to bedtime, or in the evening time, or even the late afternoon, it can affect the quality of your sleep in the evening at night time. And of course, drinking too much coffee can make people feel anxious, so nervous, maybe a little bit uncomfortable. And perhaps if you have other health conditions, maybe some heart problems, coffee and caffeine in general can make things worse. So it can make you feel quite bad. But to be honest, these are all quite small things and they are easily managed. So if you can't drink coffee, don't drink it. But if you feel that coffee benefits you, it benefits your life, then I think it's a good drink to have and to love. One part of coffee culture that I really like is going to coffee shops with friends. So just having a conversation and a chat over a nice hot cup of coffee. I think that coffee can really connect people together. That's amazing. And of course, I really do think that coffee just tastes amazing. It's such a nice flavour and taste. Recently, in the past year, we bought a big coffee machine. And this machine uses whole bean coffee. So it's not pre-ground. And when you grind the beans, that's when you take the whole beans and you make them into a powder. But with this machine, it takes the whole beans, makes them into a powder inside of the machine, and produces the coffee. So just like in a coffee shop. And it makes very tasty coffee. The machine is really cool because it also has a nozzle or a device which makes the milk nice and hot and thick and what we call frothy. And the result is a lovely creamy coffee, just like one from a coffee shop. So now when I am working from home, I make sure to drink 2 or 3 cups of coffee every day. And I'm enjoying a nice hot cappuccino right now as I record this podcast. But of course, there are so many different types of coffees too. Some people love to drink iced coffees in the summertime, especially when it is warm. Other people like to drink just plain black coffee without milk. And in many countries, people love to just drink an espresso shot. So a little tiny coffee, which is just pure coffee. It's very strong, and therefore they drink a small amount. I think that different countries have different cultures around different hot drinks. In the UK, for example, we drink a lot of tea. And in the past, tea was probably the biggest drink. But now I think that coffee is just as popular. And in fact, over time, more and more people are drinking more coffee. And everywhere I see lots and lots of coffee shops opening up. In the past, when I was a child, I didn't really see a lot of coffee shops around. I mainly saw some old-fashioned cafes which did tea and maybe like toasted sandwiches, stuff like that. But now most of the coffee shops that open are very coffee focused. So lots of different coffee types. And the main purpose is to get your coffee. Maybe it's just because more and more people get addicted to caffeine and they need to keep buying coffee. As well, when I was a kid, I didn't really like the taste of coffee. And I think that's the same for most children. Coffee is bitter, so the taste is bitter. And therefore, for a lot of children, it is very hard to drink and not so nice. But I think once your taste buds, so your tongue, develops as you get older, it becomes easier to start enjoying some of those more extreme tastes. And after trying coffee a few times, I started to really like it. Thank you so much for listening to this Easy English podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe if you're new, and if you're a subscriber already, like the video and comment down below if you like coffee or not, and what your favourite hot drink is. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next episode of the Easy English podcast. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Easy English podcast by Understandable English. And today we are going to be talking about quite an interesting and maybe more professional topic. And that topic is working with international colleagues. So within this topic, we are going to look at a little bit about project communication, cultural differences, and some of the differences with working with British and American colleagues, for example. This podcast is useful, this episode is useful for general listening, or if you want to use English for work. If you are working with international colleagues or want to work internationally with your English in the future, then it might be a little bit interesting for you with some of the points. Before we get started, I just want to say that following some messages and comments that I received, I have changed the subscription podcast. I have removed it from Spotify as it is not available in a lot of countries. And what I have done instead is I have made a Patreon account. It's totally optional, but if you want to support this podcast, there are a variety of different levels and tiers that you can support, and you get different things for that extra. So lots of bonus content, episodes, exclusive series, which is only on there, as well as access to a group chat with me where you can ask me questions, and I'll even be doing some live video question and answers on there. So lots of interesting stuff. So you can check that out in the link below. So the Patreon link below. But let's get back to the episode. Okay, so one thing which is so important with professional English language, so using English language in the workplace, is how you communicate. So the style and the way that you do it. But before I talk about communication styles, I really wanted to look at it in relation to projects. If you're working on a project or a task or really anything with a foreign colleague, so someone from a different country, and you're communicating together in English, there are a few very important things which I think that you can use for any country, and they're very, very effective for helping your work go smoothly. These are not work specific or industry specific. They are just from a position of using English. The first really important thing is to be patient. So you're not always going to understand each other. And it's very important to understand that often, in many cases, it is neither of your native languages. It is a second language for both people. And even in the case where it is only your second language, you still need to be patient, because perhaps the other person is also trying to make sure that they understand you. And if both people are patient, or the whole group is, it will go so much easier. The next point is to be direct and open about sort of what you need, about deadlines, and about everything that you're working on. We will talk about some different communication styles, and those can be important when dealing with the UK or the US, But in general, for work across the world, when communicating internationally, it's very important to be still quite direct, but more importantly than being direct, being clear. So clear about what you want, about what you're asking for, and about what you expect, maybe from your meeting or your discussion. This is key and most important for international communication within business and the professional sphere. This leads me on to communication and different cultural styles of communication within business. So when I talk about communication, it refers or it means not only language, but also the style and how you do it. So there are direct and indirect communication styles, as well as low and high context cultures. And I'll explain in a little bit what that actually means. For direct communication in business, it is appreciated to get to the point or to cut the chase. And what that means is to be very clear and direct about what you think and feel. So yes is yes and no is no. And this style is very common in the US, in Germany, Australia, the Netherlands, and Eastern Europe as well. With indirect communication in business, it's appreciated that communication is done in such a way that there won't be an argument or conflict, or in cultures where respect and personal image is very important, indirect communication is used as a way that people do not lose reputation. So yes maybe isn't always yes, and no isn't always no. And the main places that you will find this style of communication is India, China, Japan, and maybe parts of Asia as well, other parts, and in the Middle East in some areas too. And of course, the UK. So the UK uses quite a mixed style of communication, but there are some strong aspects of indirect communication. So working with direct business communication is very easy. You just be direct, clear, and concise. But how do we deal with indirect? So it's important to remember when you deal with indirect cultures that you should avoid like sharp comments. So saying something very negative directly to someone. And also pay a lot of attention to non-verbal behaviors or actions. So for example, the body language, maybe how someone says something. And this can be very difficult. It's often easier to say this than it is to actually do it. So let me give you an example. So for example, in English, there is often a lot of sarcasm. So someone might say, like, even if something is bad, they might say, oh, that's really good. But they say it in such a way that you can tell from how they say it that it's a joke or that they don't actually think that. And maybe on their face as well, you can see their expression that they aren't very happy with it. So these are some aspects to take into consideration when working with foreign or international colleagues. And that leads me to the next one, something which is quite different across countries and culture, and that is time. What do I mean by that? So it's how they see time. So being early, being late, that type of thing. So just like with communication styles, if someone is very direct to an indirect culture, they would see it as rude. So rude or not very nice. The same with time. In some countries and cultures, they are not so strict with being early. For example, they might say, let's meet at 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 a.m. And they turn up to the meeting at 8:45 or 9 o'clock. And this is totally normal. It's fine. Whereas in other countries, when they say, let's meet at 8 a.m., they really mean that you should be there at 7:45, early, ready to start at 8 a.m. And how do you know? So the only way with any of these things, these cultural things, is to research about maybe the country that you're working with and the culture that is in that country. And that's the most important thing. If you work with people from Germany, research about the German work culture, about the culture of communication in Germany, and do some reading. It's the best way to find out, or just ask a German, ask your colleagues. It's that simple. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to this episode about working with international or foreign colleagues in English. These were just a few aspects or points that I have noticed from working with people in English all around the world, or from all around the world. And I hope that they were interesting. As always, thank you so much for listening. If you want to support this podcast, the Patreon link is down below. And if not, that's fine. Check out the YouTube channel as well, where I post real life easy English vlogs for you to watch. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a great day. Goodbye. Welcome back to the Easy English podcast. I'm your host, Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about a very important topic, the environment. And we are going to be talking about it in easy and clear English to help you learn. To me, this is an incredibly important topic. So why we should protect and help the environment. Whether we notice it or not, everything in our daily lives depends on a healthy environment, from the air that we breathe to the food that we eat. So today, let's explore why taking care of our planet matters and how each of us can make a difference. And hopefully, in the process, you will hear and learn some new words while practicing your English listening skills. So to start with, let's talk a little bit about why protecting the environment is important. Why is it important? Often people are so quick to dismiss, so not want to talk about the topic of the environment. They want to focus more on business, on progress, making money, and development. But in reality, our planet, the planet Earth, our environment, provides us with so many basic and essential things for us. The air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and even the weather patterns that allow us to grow food. These all come from nature. And of course, here in the UK, in the United Kingdom, we love to talk about the weather. So it's a very relevant, a very important topic. And without a healthy environment, it becomes harder and harder for us to continue to live and have healthy lives. All sorts of nasty things like pollution, deforestation, which is cutting down trees, and climate change put a lot of stress on the planet. And this stress affects us as people too. For example, we might have dirtier water. So we might not be able to swim as much because we are polluting the water. We might have less food or less of certain types of food because we can't grow it anymore. Or we might have more extreme types of weather, more hurricanes, more heat waves and droughts, more floods. These are all reasons as to why we should help our environment. Okay, so the first point as to why we should help and protect our environment is our connection with nature. So we are one with nature when you think about it. We aren't separate. Think about how connected we are. If forests are cut down, if we cut down and remove the trees, not only are those trees gone and the animals lose their homes, but we also lose a source of clean air, as the trees help to produce oxygen for us. If we pollute our oceans, not only do the fish and the marine life be affected, but it also affects our food supply, as many people depend on fish for food. So as you can see, when we hurt nature, when we harm nature, we hurt ourselves, we hurt people too. And ultimately, if we destroy nature, we will destroy ourselves. We will destroy humans in the long term. And I know this sounds quite depressing, quite sad, like, oh no, look what we are doing to the environment, it's very bad. But that's why I want to talk mainly about what can we do to help. So now that we know that protecting the environment is important and that our actions make a difference, what can we actually do to help protect the environment? Well, to be honest, you don't need to be a superhero to help the environment. And I also understand that so much of what we can do to protect the environment is outside of our control. So it is decisions from governments, from big businesses, and these will have much more of an influence than what we do personally. But if each and every person does their own bit to help the environment, then it will cause a large change and a large help to the environment across the world. So here are some small steps or small things that can have a really big impact. Number one is to reduce, reuse, and recycle. So to try to cut down on waste, on the stuff that we throw away. Recycling helps us to lessen the amount of trash, the amount of rubbish that we put into landfills. Because these landfills, these places where we leave our trash, they create very dangerous gases that go into the atmosphere. So reusing items instead of buying new ones can also really help us to reduce waste. For example, buying second-hand items, things that have already been used and that person doesn't want them anymore. The second point that we can do to help is to save energy. My dad loves this one. He loves to turn off lights, to use energy-saving light bulbs. And these are things that we can do too. So we can turn off lights when we don't need them. We can use energy efficient light bulbs. And we can also just make sure that we're not wasting electricity. So leaving things on overnight when we don't need to. This helps reduce the demand for electricity, which also helps reduce the non-renewable energy sources that we're using, like oil and gas. And just like saving energy, we can also save water. So just like energy, we can take shorter showers, for example, and use less water. And also make sure that we don't have any leaks, like when water is escaping, getting away from a pipe. Water is so important for our planet and for life, and there are many places that don't have enough water. So it's important that we use less and leave more for nature. Something else that we can do, which is important, is to maybe support companies and use products that are sustainable and better for the environment. So to just take a look and see if a company has maybe packaging that is eco-friendly, for example, that you can recycle. Maybe a company that donates large amounts of money to help the environment, or that are reducing their pollution, so the level of pollution that they do into the environment. All of these things can be very important. These are just a few examples of little steps that we can take to help protect our environment. Because after all, we are not just helping the environment, we are helping ourselves and our future, and our children's future. Imagine a future where everyone works together to protect the environment. Clean air, healthy forests, safe drinking water, all of these things are possible for the whole world if we all just do our part. Remember, each small step matters, and we can all do our part. When we do, these actions, these little steps, all add up and make a big positive impact on the planet. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy English podcast. If you found this episode helpful and interesting, and you're new to the channel, please subscribe and like this video. If you're a listener or new, like the video to support and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think and maybe some topic ideas for future videos. Until next time, stay safe and keep doing your part to protect our environment. Have a lovely day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Understandable English podcast. Today's topic is how important is reading with learning English? So we're going to look at, is it really that important? And I am going to tell you exactly what I think from my experience teaching English to many students from different countries. And of course, from my experience learning foreign languages as well. So to start with, I will say yes, I think reading in another language is essential, very important to learning the language. But it isn't so important for speaking and understanding the language as you might think. I always say, and I will say it time and time again, that you should be speaking and listening to English as much as you can. But reading is still important. Here is why. To start with, reading really helps you with vocabulary. Regardless of your level, reading helps with target languages. It helps you build and boost your vocabulary, the number of words you know whenever you read. Because naturally, you are going to be exposed, you're going to see lots of different words and expressions, especially if this content, if this text is written by a native speaker. Over time, your vocabulary, so the amount of words in English that you know, will expand. It will grow, and you will understand more and more English. But one important thing to know is that even though you learn lots of new words, it won't help you to use them. The reason for this is that most of these words will go into your passive vocabulary. These are words that you understand, that you recognize, but not words that you use in your everyday speech when you do speaking practice or you try to speak in English. But there is some good news here. Now that these words are in your passive vocabulary, you can move them to your active vocabulary much easier. Your active vocabulary is the words that you use in speech, so when you're speaking. And the more you practice speaking and having conversations, the more of these passive words you will begin to use, and it might surprise you. When I was learning Russian, and I still do, I learned lots of words every day using applications. I tried to learn 10 new words every single day. And over time, I noticed that I would understand these words from speech, from TV, from books, news articles, but I didn't really use these words. However, with time, when I was talking about specific topics, like specialist topics such as politics or technology, and I would try to find the right word, eventually, one of these words that I had learnt would pop into my head and I would use it, and I would gradually start to use that word more and more in my speech. And that is the magic of reading in another language. When we read in another language, we see the words in context. So we see the words around it and how it is meant to be used. And when you're speaking, you might find yourself coming across some of these contexts, similar sentences or environments. And at this moment, you might find yourself using such words. Another key reason for learning through reading is that reading and grammar are closely connected. Learning and memorizing grammar rules can be boring. However, grammar is of course essential in learning a language because without it, it's hard to speak quite fluently. But the good news is reading and grammar are closely connected. With reading, you will start to see grammar patterns. You will learn sentence structures, and you will see grammar exceptions which you have studied maybe in a book or in a class. Reading is a perfect way to improve your grammar and to recap and learn over the rules that you already know. And naturally, over time, the more you practice speaking, this can only help you. Reading is also so closely connected to writing skills. The more you read, the more writing styles you will see and understand. and you can even start to copy these writing styles. But there are many other great reasons for reading in another language besides simply improving your grammar or learning new words. And one of these is that it is simply good for your brain. When you read in another language and you start to understand it, in a way you are thinking in that language. You're using that language in your brain. You can also read anything you want. You can choose areas that you are interested in. If you love literature or books, you can read those. If you love news articles or science, technology, politics, anything is available to you online. We are so lucky to have access to the internet and the unlimited amount of information that you can access in English. Even by going on social media like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you can see so much content in English. And there you will see a lot more slang or colloquialisms, which are native phrases or native words, which are maybe informal language, but words and phrases that locals and natives use every day. It's also quite relaxing. Whenever we read, I find that our brains go into quite a relaxed state. It's not as stressful for me as doing grammar exercises, for example, or even speaking about a topic I don't know so much about. But mainly it comes down to this: variety, so doing different things. When you're on your English language learning journey, it's best to do lots of different things for learning English. This keeps it interesting for you. You won't always be doing a course book, you won't always be learning grammar or trying to speak all of the time. It will help you improve your level while doing different things and staying interested and excited about learning English. So every now and again, even before you go to sleep, I would recommend putting down that course book, that study book, stopping some grammar, pick up a book or an article in English and give it a read. Of course, keep listening to as much English as you can and speaking as much as possible. These are still far more important by reading than reading, but it doesn't make reading not important. I hope that this episode was useful for you and that you got some good listening practice. Let me know, do you read in English? What do you like to read? Do you read books, articles, or just comments online? And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. As always, send me recommendations of topics that you want to hear about in the podcast. Have a great day and a fantastic week, and I will speak to you very soon. Goodbye. Hello everyone. Welcome back to the Easy English podcast. I'm Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about how to overcome your fear of speaking English in public. To overcome means to solve a problem or to beat something. Does the idea of speaking English in front of others scare you? Well, to be honest, we've all been there. It's often so much easier to read, write, or practice English grammar on our own. And for many, speaking is the biggest difficulty with learning English. During all of my time teaching English, it is the number one problem that I see when someone is nervous or worried or scared about speaking English. Perhaps they are worried about making mistakes or having incorrect pronunciation. It is so common, and if you experience this, you are not alone. So today I want to give you some tips to help you speak English more confidently. So the very first step to stop being worried or scared to practice your wonderful English skills is to understand why you're feeling worried or anxious. For most people, the key reason is a lack of confidence, so they don't feel confident, or a lack of belief in their English skills. Perhaps you don't think that your English is very good. Another common reason is perhaps you have had a negative or bad experience in the past when speaking English. Or maybe you just think that your English has to be perfect when you speak it. The solution for all of these reasons is to have realistic expectations. What that means is that you don't need to expect or want so much from yourself. Learning a new language isn't easy. And mistakes are an important part of the process. It doesn't matter how much time or effort you put into it, you will still make mistakes. You need to accept the fact that you will make mistakes, you won't have perfect pronunciation, and you won't speak like a native speaker immediately. And here's the big secret. No one else expects these things except for you. The fact that you are trying to speak a second language is already impressive. Most native English speakers can not even speak another language even a little bit. So don't feel sad or upset if you make a small grammar mistake or you don't know a word. If no one else is judging you or testing you like an exam, why should you do it to yourself? When I first started studying Russian language, I was very scared to speak. I was worried that people wouldn't understand me because of my accent, my bad pronunciation, and one day I just realized that I have to speak. I have to speak and not worry about mistakes or grammar or any of those things. And when you do that, it becomes so much easier. Whenever you make a mistake, maybe a bad pronunciation or the wrong words, it is a moment that you can use to learn. Maybe your conversation partner will explain the correct answer to you, or you can ask them if what you have said is correct. If we change our mindset, how we think, to look at mistakes and conversations as lessons, as learning, it really helps us with this. Honestly, some of the biggest mistakes I have made when learning Russian, I have remembered, and I haven't made those mistakes again. They have helped me to learn perhaps a grammar rule or new vocabulary, and going forward in the future, I can improve and do even better. The number one way to improve your speaking and to feel better about it is to build confidence. And the only way you can build confidence is by practicing. It doesn't matter how much grammar you do, how much you read, how much you use English books or watch YouTube videos. The only way to truly build your confidence is to speak, is to practice as much as you can. This might include communicating with native speakers, perhaps taking part in English language classes, or even just having a practice conversation with yourself. The more you practice and communicate, the easier it will become for you. That is the simple truth. It's the same for other activities and skills in life, and language learning is no different. The worst thing that you can do is to avoid or not speak when you have the opportunity. There are so many times when I've had students or friends who let me speak instead of them when they had an opportunity to speak English. And this mentality, this idea, it really holds you back. It stops you from progressing. So even if you don't know the word you're looking for or exactly how to say something, use the words that you do know. Say something in a more simple way and really, really try. And with time, you will get better. I promise you that. When you speak, try not to think about grammar. All of the grammar that you have learned is in your brain somewhere. It's in your mind. And when we speak, we shouldn't think about how to correctly say something. This is difficult to do, but with practice, you need to just try and say what comes to your mind. And at first, you may make sentences with strange grammar, strange words, but the most important part about speaking is that the other person will understand you. It is not about whether you have used the correct tense or correct pronunciation. Your conversation partner won't care. And actually, it will be a lot more strange for them if you're stopping and thinking and speaking very slowly because you want to speak correctly. It is more natural to speak with the mistakes that you make. And with time, you will learn from these and improve. When I speak Russian, I speak with pretty bad grammar. But the main point is that people understand me. And I'm able to have fluent or quite fluent conversations because I don't stress and I don't worry about grammar too much. My main advice for you with English is to practice and find someone to practice with. There are so many websites and applications out there where you can find a language exchange partner. So someone from another country who wants to learn your language. And of course, you are learning theirs. So you can talk to each other in a casual and stress-free situation. This can help you so much to practice and build confidence. In my opinion, speaking English or speaking a language is the most fun out of all aspects of learning. It's more fun to me than grammar or reading or listening, and honestly, I think once you practice it too, you will think the same. You might already think the same. And if you're in a position where speaking doesn't scare you that much, I still have the same advice for you. Speak, 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 and speak some more. Speak as much as you can. Speaking and listening are the basics of language. Think about a child. When a child learns a language, they are hearing it from their parents. They are speaking. They are repeating. And for us too, it is the same. Of course, grammar is important, learning new words is important, but the fundamentals of speaking and listening are the number one way to learn a language for communication. So I hope this episode was useful for you, and I really hope that you come back for the next episode. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you soon. Welcome back to the Easy English Podcast. I'm Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about something that's important for everyone, and that is sleep. Getting a good night's sleep can improve our health, our mood, and focus. But many people struggle to sleep well, so in this episode, I'm going to have a look and talk about some tips to help you get better sleep each night. And hopefully, along the way, you will learn some new English words and get some useful, helpful English listening practice. Let's get started. So first off, let's look at why sleep matters. Why is sleep important? So when we sleep, our bodies recharge and our brains organize everything that we've learned throughout the day. Good sleep helps our memory, our mood, and our energy. Without enough sleep, we can feel tired, stressed, and kind of like it's harder to concentrate. So harder to focus on things. So if you want to feel healthier and more focused, a good sleep routine is key. Sleep is a very important part of having a healthy lifestyle. Just think even about yourself. How many times have you had a bad night's sleep and the next day it is so hard to focus, to learn, to listen to new information, and maybe to even learn English? So by getting better sleep, you might be able to learn English better too. So now let's look at some tips for better sleep. Here are some simple changes that you can make starting even tonight to try to improve your sleep. I try to do most of these because often I have bad sleep too. And I think that we can all find something that we can improve to get a better night's sleep. So let's get started. The first point is pretty basic, and it's something that we should all do anyway, and that is to set a sleep schedule. To try to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day. It doesn't matter if it's a weekend or a weekday, we should go to bed and wake up at the same time. This allows our body to create a natural sleep rhythm, which makes it easier for us to fall asleep and wake up feeling refreshed. I don't know about you, but for me, I struggle with this. At the weekend, I always want to stay up later. I want to do things, maybe watch a movie, to read a book and relax, and then I find it hard to get up early. I am definitely a night owl. I like to stay up at nighttime. I am not a morning person. I don't like early mornings. But of course, when we are working Monday to Friday on a weekday, we need to get up early for most people. So I do have to get up early, but on the weekend, I don't want to. So this is a tip that I can get better at for sure. The second tip is to create a routine, ideally a calming routine. Before bed, we should do something relaxing. This can be like reading a book, maybe taking a warm shower, or listening to some calm, relaxing music, or a podcast. Maybe even this podcast could help. What you should do is avoid activities that might make you feel too awake, such as watching TV or using your phone, maybe to message or to type something. Another tip, which I am quite bad at, is to limit caffeine and sugar. So we should avoid coffee, tea, and sugary snacks close to bedtime. And to be honest, I've heard some people say that we shouldn't drink coffee or caffeine in general after lunchtime. And for me, this is very hard. I love coffee. And maybe you listened to the previous episode of the podcast where I talked about coffee and how much I love it. So this is very hard for me. But these things, like caffeine and sugar, keep you awake and make it harder to fall into a deep sleep. So it's probably better that we drink maybe herbal tea or something without caffeine. But I know this is easier said than done. It is easier to talk about rather than to do. Another point that we can do is to exercise during the day. Regular exercise definitely helps us to sleep better. But it's better to not exercise right before bed, as this can make us even more awake. And finally, our last point is to make your bedroom comfortable. It is better for us to have a dark, quiet, and a comfortable temperature room. If our room is too bright or we have light coming from outside, we can use an eye mask to block out the light. And for noise, you could try to maybe use earplugs or white noise. I use white noise. It really helps me because I am a light sleeper. A light sleeper is someone that wakes up easily. So anytime I hear a noise like someone opening a door or a loud motorbike outside, I wake up. I wake up so easily to noise. And I find that using white noise really helps me. So it very much helps me to sleep more deeply. So next we are going to look at common sleep challenges. So some things that really affect my sleep. But first, I just want to quickly say that if you would like to support this podcast, there is a Patreon that you can click the link to in the description. Every week I upload extra bonus episodes of the podcast to the Patreon with extra content and a brand new series called Easy News in English, where I read a news article and story in English for you and explain difficult words. So the link is in the description below, and if you'd like to support, please check it out and help our project. Thank you. Now back to the episode. So some common challenges we've already talked about, but others I would say are stress. Stress is a really, really big challenge for sleep. And of course, if we feel stressed, it can be very difficult to get a good night's sleep. There is nothing worse than lying in bed at night and thinking about work or about some kind of difficult task that you have to do. So something that might help with this is to try to calm your mind. That could be deep breathing, for example. It could be listening to relaxing music or maybe even meditation or yoga, something like that. For each of us, we have different things that can help us to calm our mind. But those are just a few things that we can do to try to help. Another thing that sometimes can be out of our control is noise. I briefly mentioned this before, but white noise or earplugs can really help with this. Trying to soundproof our room to keep noise out can also very much help. Those are just a few things that we can do and some challenges that we face. And I think that we can all try to get a better night's sleep. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you're new, please subscribe. If you're not, let me know in the comments below and maybe tell me, how do you sleep? Are you a light sleeper? A heavy sleeper? Do you sleep well? Let me know. And I hope you have a great night's sleep today. Goodbye and see you in the next episode. Bye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Understandable English podcast. My name is Oliver, and today we are going to be talking about camping. So what is camping? And I am going to be talking about a recent camping trip that I took with my friends. Okay, the official definition of camping is a holiday that is spent in a tent. But it can be 1 or 2 nights, it can be a small trip and maybe include hiking. But in general, it is staying somewhere in a tent, often in nature or in the wild or even at a campsite, so a place designed for camping. And in case you don't know the word in English, a tent is something that you build and it has fabric or cloth and you sleep inside of it. When I was a teenager, I did quite a bit of camping. So I went camping quite a few times with both friends and family. And I loved it. I did really enjoy it. There is a lot of satisfaction and enjoyment from building the tent, making a place to stay, cooking some food, and enjoying nature and time with friends or family. So today I'm going to talk a bit about a recent camping trip. I've actually made an easy English vlog about this trip on my YouTube channel. I will leave the link below, so after you listen to this podcast, you can watch the video and see exactly what I was talking about and see the place I was and what we did. A few weeks ago, it was one of our friends' birthdays, and they decided that they wanted to go camping for their birthday. So we all got our stuff ready, our tents and supplies. To be honest, it had been a long time since we went camping, or since I have been camping. And my wife, Kate, had never really been camping properly before, only one time, which was on a kind of organized trip. So we had to try and find all of the stuff that we needed. Some of the items that we needed included a tent, a cooker, so a gas cooker, something to make the food on. We had to gather all of the food and supplies that we needed as well. And I brought a cooling box. This is a box or a container. We call it a cooler to keep the food cold and to stop it from going bad. For sleeping, we brought sleeping bags. These are almost like blanket bags that you get into at night to sleep. I'm sure you have used these before, but in English we call them sleeping bags, and they keep you nice and warm. And of course we brought a lot of blankets too and pillows. So for this trip we weren't exactly going into the wild. We were going to a campsite, a place for camping, and it was on the north coast, so in the very north of Ireland, of Northern Ireland. It is quite windy there at times, and it is close to the seaside. The benefit of this is that we were bringing the car, so there was plenty of space to bring items. We didn't have to carry them in big backpacks. Because of this, we also brought some air beds or air mattresses, which I could inflate, so to put air into them from the car. And it made sleeping a little bit more comfortable. Okay, so we've gathered all of our items for camping. We've got lights, food, tent, sleeping stuff like sleeping bags, air beds, and everything that we need. And we set off, so we left in the car. The weather at home seemed really nice, but as we drove towards the campsite, it began to look more cloudy and like it was going to rain. And it did start to rain a few times. And I thought, great, this is going to be a wet weekend and quite a difficult weekend to enjoy the outdoors. When we arrived to the campsite, we were the first people there from our friends, and we decided to start setting up our tent because it is quite a big tent. And I haven't set it up in years, so I had to try to remember how to do it. It took us probably about 90 minutes to set up. It was quite a task. And during the time, it began to rain very heavily, and we had to stop building our tent and take a break and hide in the car. But eventually, we got the tent up, and some random strangers, people that we don't know, also helped us to set it up. They were very kind. And then once our friends arrived, I was able to help them set up the tents or their tents as well. The weather cleared up and became a bit nicer, which allowed us to enjoy being outdoors more. We began to set up for cooking, and for dinner we decided to have steaks, so barbecue steaks. So we prepared the barbecue and started the fire and got the steaks ready. They took quite a while to cook, but they were so tasty and very worth it. We had mushrooms as well, which we barbecued on the fire, and halloumi cheese, which is very nice. Then afterwards, we had burgers as well. I had so much food, and I felt quite sleepy afterwards because I had eaten so much stuff. But we were able to enjoy sitting outdoors, eating our food, and having great times together, listening to music and talking. It was a really nice evening. It got a lot colder at night once it was dark and quite windy as well. But the nice part about the darkness was we could really see the stars. They were so clear at night time. So I enjoyed looking up at the sky and seeing the stars very clear. But it was time for bed. We went and got some sleep, but I didn't sleep very well because it was quite noisy during the night. Tents are not very good at keeping noise out, so of course I could hear everything. So people talking and dogs barking, babies crying, all the noise from around the campsite. And in the morning, some terrible weather started. It was so windy and rainy, it felt like a storm or a hurricane. It was intense. The weather was so bad that we actually couldn't cook breakfast outside. So we got in the cars and we drove to the restaurant and we had our breakfast indoors, which was tasty. And after that, we tried to take down our tents and pack everything up. It was so wet and I got soaked with water. My clothes were wet, my hair was wet, and afterwards I just couldn't wait to get home, to have a shower and a warm drink and just relax. But overall, it was still a really great trip and we had such a good time. But let me know if you like camping and have you went on many camping trips. So leave a comment below and let me know. And make sure to check out the YouTube video of camping, so the Easy English vlog that I will leave in the description below. Thank you for listening and have a great day. Goodbye. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Understandable English podcast. My name is Oliver, and today we are going to talk about a few different things. So I have first an announcement or a bit of news, and then we are going to talk about this month, so September, and the changes that happen in September with the changing seasons. Okay. So first, some news. If you listen to this podcast on Spotify, you might have noticed that there are some new subscriber-only episodes. So for almost 4 years, I have done this podcast completely for free. And I will always do the podcast for free. So these weekly episodes will continue and nothing will change. I want them to be free for English learners forever. But what I am starting to help support and grow the podcast is a subscription. So a very small subscription to help me to focus more on the podcast and on growing the project, so the YouTube channel and everything around it. And it's completely optional. It is just to help me and to support. But what you get whenever you do support, with the price of a coffee every month, it will get you one bonus episode of the podcast every single week. So that is a special subscriber-only episode every single week for extra learning. And you can also, on those episodes, ask me questions. So you can ask me questions and I will answer them in another episode of the podcast, of the subscribers-only podcast. You'll also get access to episodes a little bit earlier than everyone else, straight away. So extra episodes of the podcast, question and answers you can ask me, and early access to new episodes. If you like the sound of that and you want to help support the podcast and myself, then you can click the link in the description below and sign up for this through Spotify. Or on Spotify, you can click one of those episodes and also sign up. Okay, that's everything. That's the news with that. Oh, and also I will mention I'm still making those easy English vlogs on YouTube. So they're completely free, of course, just YouTube videos. And it's the same style as this podcast. So I make real life videos, but speaking slowly in English. And the link is also in the description below. Okay, now let's go back to today's topic. And that is September and the changing of the seasons. So September is a month of change and transition. Transition is when something changes. This is because the seasons are changing from summer to autumn, so to the autumn season. And one key event that is very important is called the autumnal equinox. Now that sounds very complicated and fancy. Don't worry. What the autumnal equinox is that it happens around September 22nd or the 23rd of September in the north of the world. And it is just the day that marks or notes the end of summer and the beginning of autumn. And during this day, this special day, there is almost the equal amount of daylight and also darkness. For example, 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. So it's equal light and equal dark. And from this point onwards, the days get shorter and the darkness becomes longer, so there's more dark during the rest of the year. And of course, in many countries, not every country, but particularly in the north of the world, the days become colder as well. So much, much colder. Now, I will make a separate episode about autumn and different things in autumn. But of course, I can't mention the changing of seasons without talking about how the leaves change colour on the trees. So this is a very strong sign that the season is changing and that there is a transition. So a change, a transition is a change as the season changes. And the leaves' colour, or the colour of the leaves, is a really good visual symbol of this. So a very clear thing that you can see to show this change. Okay, so I think September is also such a month of change because for many people in our societies, in our countries, it is the start of something. So if you're in education, it is for many the month and the time when you start back to school or university. Lots of students are, seeing this as the start of a new year or maybe a new school or a new course. And it marks a change, a beginning of a new chapter or part of their life. Of course, this can affect parents too, because for them, their children are going back to school. And maybe they had some holidays in the summertime, and we think, okay, now we're back to normal routine, back to work, back to school, and getting into the darker, shorter days with less relaxing time. For me, I quite like September. I think it's quite a nice month. Often we have a little bit nicer weather here, because in summertime in Northern Ireland, it can be quite wet at times. The weather can change a lot. And September usually seems to be a nicer month for some reason. I also like when I start to see the Halloween stuff. And even today in the supermarket, I saw some Christmas items. Isn't that crazy? On the 22nd of September, they are already selling Christmas items in shops. That's crazy. I also love seeing the change in seasons in the plants and the trees and the nature all around. In Northern Ireland, we have some very beautiful forests and parks, and it's so nice to be able to watch and walk and see all of the different beautiful colours and leaves and everything all around. It's so pretty. Let me know in the comments below what your favourite part of maybe the changing seasons is. Or if you like September, do you like September? Let me know in the comments. Of course, I understand that a lot of people don't like this time of year because they notice that the days are getting shorter and they think, oh no, winter is coming, it's going to be cold and dark and no longer nice summer or springtime. But I think it's important to focus on the positives, the nice parts. Think of the nice holidays that are coming, like Halloween or Christmas, the Christmas and winter foods, hot chocolate, the nice colours of the leaves, and all of those fun and happy times that come with the changing of the seasons. But of course, we all have different favourite times and months of the year. So I'm not trying to convince you or make you think something. But I hope you have an amazing rest of September and autumn. So thank you very much for listening. Remember to check out those links in the description below. And thank you so much for listening and for supporting this podcast. Have a fantastic day. Goodbye.